this so you can see it. I have the most crazy setup, but it all works now.
Nice. So what I generally do, so I was just looking through this here. So I do the
Yeah.
preprocessors like I pointed out before, that whole pound if, because that
Hmm.
that'll dictate which code is actually being compiled. So like pound if Unity standalone or Unity editor, that tells me I'm on something that has a keyboard and a mouse, right? And so what I do is I start with the input, so input.getAccess horizontal, and then I only override that. I have Boolean flags that basically say, hey, I have touch or I don't have touch, and hey, I have controller or I don't have controller. And those booleans can be turned on and off on the fly. And so basically I say, hey, this is my input, this is my horizontal, right? Which is your keyboard or whatever. Hey, if I have touch, let me check that out. And if I have joystick, let me check that out. And that helps alleviate the issue. Another thing is if you are registering uh, activity on one of those, but not the other two, the one that you're registering activity on has precedence. So
So
I basically,
that's what I was starting to do then. And
yeah,
I guess that's where my head was. I was going to tell my input manager that it has a mode, and the two things it would react to is whatever input it detects, it'll trigger that mode as the master input, and
yeah,
then it'll just accept it from that. So if you are on a device that has a touch screen and a controller, if you hit the touch screen, it'll respond to touchscreen controls. If you're hitting the controller, it'll do the controller. So like, I have one around here somewhere. I haven't hooked it up yet.
You know what would be the
Um,
easiest way to do this, actually?
what?
So your horizontal axis is what between -1 and 1, right?
Right.
So just take all your inputs, so horizontal on keyboard, horizontal for touch, and horizontal for controller, just add them together. Like literally mathematical addition,
Yeah,
right?
but the problem is that the touch inputs from the UI components
Uh-huh.
aren't at the same intervals as when I'm pulling. Like I can't get them all on the same page. I have a race condition. So it's like because of the delay, even if I use like the scripts that you sent me and I implement the interface,
Uh-huh.
I still the
Well,
I
how
guess
much of a delay
unless
is there? So what you can do is, if you go into the event system game object, you'll see how many actions per second are sent. You can just increase that value.
sure, but it's never going to be in sync with the update loop
Okay, but why does it have to be?
because the update loop has to if the input isn't coming in from from the axis, I have to reset those values. So I have to set them as false. And then what happens is that it sets it as false right after or before in the middle of while it's trying to capture an event from touch, and the two conflict with each other.
Oh, right, because you're storing lengths of time and stuff like that.
That's why I was saying like if the touch UI was filtered into the so like the good thing about the Axis and why I switched back over to the Axis stuff
Hmm.
was that I can capture keyboard, I can capture joysticks, and I can even capture mouse to some extent and not have to give a shit, right?
Right.
But touch is like its own input system, and
Well,
it
that sort
doesn't
of
map
loops
to
me
any.
back then to my original suggestion of just keeping UI separate.
Yeah,
Have your
so I
input
think
manager only handle your hardware inputs, and then the UI just calls functions directly, and then that eliminates that whole issue.
right. I think so. Either the solution, I think where my head is sort of going to right now is I think I'm going to try to just handle the input manager where whatever input is being pressed becomes that input.
Hmm.
So like by default, I think what I'll do is I'll throw it into a certain mode. So if I detect, hey, there's a joystick, you're going to be in joystick mode, right? So this way, if you like boot it up on Fire TV, it's not like, hey, touch here to start. It'll just be like, hey, it'll automatically detect and set the input manager to the correct mode. But
Hmm.
then if for some reason it detects like, you're in joystick mode and you detect touch, it'll just flip it back over. The other thing that I need to look at into, which I have to like really sit down and think it through it,
Hmm.
is I can make the input state reset its own flags after every frame,
Hmm.
and then just see that hey, yeah, I could. So like you usually like in UI stuff, you have like a dirty flag, right? So I could
Right.
basically say, hey,
did change.
a new frame has happened. All of these are marked as dirty. If they're not down the next frame, they've been released, and then update the timer, right? Because
Yeah.
I told you, like, the other thing I need to do is keep track of the time that a button's been pressed down.
So it seems like you've got two kind of conflicting interests. One, you're trying to make it super robust, but on the other, you also said that you need to make it simple enough to teach, and I don't know that you're going to be able to get both.
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I do. No, this stuff is, I consider this like very advanced stuff, but the problem is that, you know, you have to learn it. And I think the thing, normally, like I said, I sort of consider this like a weird Unity issue, because it's just like the new UI stuff is really cool, but because those events are on their own event system, independent of the traditional input manager,
Yeah.
it's like it creates this weird scenario.
Right, you have to do a lot of work to make it all through the same channel.
Right. And
But I mean, the old UI was the same way. All UI is NGUI,
Oh,
the
yeah.
old UI.
they all
UI.
are. I mean, I think
Yeah.
so, I think the dirty hack right now is just to switch between the two input modes, but I think what I really need to do is the input state class is actually pretty. I had it like really complicated, but now all it is just a collection of dictionaries. And I mean, yeah, I think when I do teach this stuff, this isn't going to be. This is not a beginner level class. Like, I have a
Right.
beginner level, like a intermediate thing that I'm doing, which is like just like an endless runner, like a very basic endless runner.
Yeah.
This stuff is like, hey, this is super advanced stuff. It's like, it's sort of like taking what you had with your, like, how do you do the platformer stuff, and this is like, here's how you build like the 3 greatest platformers ever, and all it is focusing on just like the way I fixed it for the difficulty was I shrank the scope to just simply be, you're just dealing with player movement, and you're not like building a whole fucking game, right?
Right, just a mechanic. Yeah.
So it's like, and technically, once you actually get this, like, once you get this behavior system that I wrote up and running, it's not very hard to like add double jump. Right?
Well, right,
It's not
because it's
very
just
hard.
modules at that point.
It's just, yeah, and then you wind up just like to go from duck to slide is, I mean, each one of these like behaviors is only 20, 30 lines of code.
Right.
I think the hardest part is like, it's all about state management.
Right.
And the more complicated architectural part is, how do you have state management without having everything tightly coupled?
Well, and you have to make them all their own unique thing, but having the exact same inputs and outputs.
Right.
So the same looking black box, even though the insides are wildly different.
Yeah. Yep. And unfortunately, this is for me to sit here and refactor this stuff on Twitch, which I'll just do anyways, because I just leave the Twitch stream open. It's like boring, mind-numbing shit to watch, right?
Yeah, right.
But I don't even think anyone's like, I think this time is basically like no man's
It's a rough
land.
time, yeah. I just randomly saw you post on Twitter, and which is why I hopped on. But but otherwise, yeah, it's a bit
Got
late.
2 people in here. In
I'm
addition
seeing
to us.
7, but I don't know how old, like, not
How are you
updated
seeing
it is.
I see 4. I don't know. The Twitch dashboard is like,
Oh yeah, it's not super accurate. That's for sure.
it's just, and then like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I've just gotten into this weird habit now of when I have some time to actually code, I'll just throw it up on Twitch anyways, because I've been finding it a lot more helpful to just talk through all the things that I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Steak.
Oh hey, what's up,
Eyeball?
Steak? I recognize Steak.
He says 7. Oh, he's saying 7. Okay, so he can you hear Mike? Hopefully he can hear you.
Yeah, hopefully.
Here. Oh, there's more people in. Cool.
Yeah, it says we got 8 now.
There we go. Let's get these fucking numbers up.
So yeah, Twitch is so used to like numbers in the thousands. So when it's like it's like plus or minus, 50.
Yeah, well, if I have that, that's a good problem to have. I think my plan for I think while you're on it, I can talk to you about normal shit that we would talk about anyways.
Sure.
So at the end of the month, I'm gonna do. I think I want to go back through my first Unity book, and I'm gonna do the entire book on Twitch. And I need to update it anyways for for like 4.6, going into 5.
Hmm.
So I figured I'd just run through all the examples and then just take all those recordings and have them and
Sure.
see how that works out. And then I want to get into some cool. People can hear you. So this is actually
Yeah.
pretty cool. Now I know how to actually Skype. This is like the craziest setup I think I've ever.
Well, this is super
created.
useful because I've wanted to know how to do collaborative Twitch sessions.
Are you are you on Windows or you're doing it from Mac?
I'm on Windows.
Okay, so yeah, so I sit here and I just pin it to the side and everything seems to work and your little icon comes up and it's great.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think next week what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick little projects, sort of like what you do, and it's
Yeah.
just like here's how to build like a health bar. Because
Sure,
I'd love
yeah,
to get
yeah.
it where it's a little bit better, where I can, instead of me just coming up with like crazy shit that I need to do in my own game. I don't know how good that is for people to watch. I actually think doing little projects.
It's like a cookbook, you know?
Yeah, I want to get to the point where I can actually take each of these videos and at least get them up on our Amazon developer portal.
Yeah.
So, because right now, I mean, this is interesting at least to me, but I don't think I, throw this up on the portal.
Right. Here's an hour-long ramble session with some other guy on the internet. Yeah, this would be great.
Well, okay, so I think, I have some ideas of how to move forward.
Yeah.
I think you confirmed. The biggest issue.
Hopefully, it didn't confuse you more.
No,
Basically.
no, no. You know what the problem is like a lot of this stuff was so new, is not well documented.
Yeah.
And I think, what I've found with Unity is that I wind up like reinventing the wheel, and a lot of times like I don't think the Unity way. I mean, Unity I consider is very much like Ruby on Rails. It's really great as long as you think like you're on Rails, and once you get off the rails, you're sort of in this like no man's land.
Yeah.
And
Right.
a lot of the times, like I mean, I come from a way different background of development than Unity, so
Well, yeah,
I
you're
don't-
doing it just like I did it back in the C++ days with like Allegro
Right.
and stuff. Yeah.
So I'm doing like this like low level kind of like thinking about it, and for the most part it works fine. But like when I was building like my tile map editor, I've like gutted and refactored my tile map editor at least like 4 times in the course of like 2 weeks
Uh-huh.
because I had to keep getting it to be like, no, think more like how Unity would do it. How would Unity do it?
Well,
And then
the
once you
neat
get to
thing
that-
there is really you can write all your C# classes Unity agnostic, and then just write one mono behavior that sort of brings the whole thing into your project. Like
Oh, I did, but I guess like at like a weirder level, it's like I had to think about like each tile is really a game object, and it's like how do you like it's just that conversion of like how do you just work within the Unity system. But I mean, the beauty of it is like everything that I do is in C#, and I got my tile map editor now can run at runtime or it can run in the editor,
nice.
and that's the kind of cool stuff. Except for last night where I had to refactor everything because I was using the asset loader instead of resources.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what talking to you helps me with, at least especially like tonight. It's like I just feel like I know how to solve all these problems. These aren't very complicated problems. Like at least I've been programming long enough to understand how to fix them. It's just I feel like there's that one little piece of information that you know about Unity that would fucking save me, like 2
Right.
to 3 hours or
You want to
days.
confirm it's a real problem before you go about fixing it.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I do that all the time. Where it's just like, do I need to fix this, or am I just overcomplicating it? But
Yeah, like if I
but
rewrote
yeah, there's
this
a
whole, like-
definite disconnect between like the UI events and I mean, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of differences in the way UI works versus everything else. But yeah, if you're trying to encapsulate the whole thing, you can do it, and you're actually kind of on the right path with that. But you're right as far as sending the updates, how not as often the UI updates as everything else. And it would be fine if you weren't resetting state. That's the part that's killing you.
And that's what I have to fix. I think if there's any message I can give you to return to your handlers, it would be, the UI stuff is awesome as UI for menus, but there's no solution for touch controls.
What if, now, I'm just sort of spitballing here because I'm not super familiar with your system, so it may or may not work. But right now you have the buttons, when you touch them, it's saying, hey, Event Manager, this is my state, right? And the problem is that it's not coming to the Event Manager every frame. But what if Instead, you made your touch events on the controls allow the control to know its own state. So, like, just put a script on the button that basically says, I'm the button, I'm either down or I'm not, and I know it, right? And so when you touch the button script is like, cool, I'm pressed, and when you let go, the button's like, cool, I'm not pressed. But have that script say, hey, event manager system, or hey, input system, I'm here, so register me with you. And then have your input manager basically say, as it's going through, like, is the S button down? Is the B button down? Is the jump button down? Hey, UI button, are you down or not down? And then the update cycle of that UI button is really not as important because it's going to be keeping its own state just as fast as it needs to. And the whole time it's down, right? It knows it's down, even though it's not updating as quickly. It's either down or it's not. Your input manager just has that value.
I thought about that, and that's actually that's a really good like alternative. Like right now, the way that this is my input state. I'll switch it back over to my input manager if I could find.
All right, I'll tell
mouse.
you when it's open.
So I mean, the thing with the input manager, I mean, not like you can see anything from this code, anyways. But I'll go to the update. So basically, I could do that. Like I could say, this button represents, like instead of like looking for the, like I could look for the x-axis, or is there a touch button that's registered to left or right? And then you're right, like the button would just handle that state, and then all I would have to do is map the UI button into the input manager, or I could actually put like a game object around all the touch buttons, and then it could just look for its children and like map it that way, right?
Yeah.
It's not a bad approach. I guess that's actually not a bad one either, because
How about this too? So sorry to interrupt kind of your train of thought.
No.
I see you have all these different if statements and whatnot. What if instead, right? So going back to that whole idea of like the set dirty kind of thing that you were talking about previously. So instead of having all these individual states, what if your input manager, since you're going to have different ones for different players, whatever, what if your input manager had like basically just a generic expand or resizable list in it that was some generic, hey, some input. And so you can say, hey, input manager, I'm interested in the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, the jump button, the jump axis, the fire axis, and these 3 UI buttons, right? And just boom, 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 put that all in your list. And then every update, just actually iterate through that list and say, hey, what's your state? What's your state? What's your state? Generically handle it, and then just say, this is the state for that, this is the state for that, whatever. And so then you don't necessarily need to hard code, because I see you have a hard coded out, like input.getAccess, input.getAccess, right? So instead, why not just, for int I equals 0, I is less than list of inputs.count, whatever, right? And just cycle process all your generic inputs.
I had that as the original system, and the problem I was having is I couldn't think of a really clean way of, the only conditional is actually the horizontal and vertical axis. Okay. Everything else you choose what buttons to map to. So I'll scroll down while I talk, and I'll wait for it to update. But like, actually I still have this hard coded. Basically at the end it was going to be like buttons I can generically loop through. The problem with it is that you would need so much metadata in order to tell the difference between a left and a right from the horizontal. I would have to almost create individual inputs for left and right.
Would you though? Because so horizontal gives you 3 values, or between 3 values, -1, 0, and 1. Buttons actually also give you between 3 values, -1, 0, and 1. However, you just never get -1.
Right, but then how do I know? Like then the thing is like I still need to have some sort of conditional of knowing whether it's a axis or it's a button.
Do you though? Because buttons are the same as axis, really.
Sure, but when would a button when would a button return a -1?
It just won't. But you know what? If I play your game and I never hit left, horizontal will never give me a -1 either. Right? Because they are actually the same thing. That just so I can see right here on your screen, you have input.getAccess jump, not getButton jump. You have getAccess jump. But right there, it's indicating the jump can be -1, 0, or 1. And if you go into the input manager and you look up jump, you can see it has both a positive and negative button. There just is no negative button.
Yeah, I hold on. Now I'm pulling up the stuff that I had originally. I've gone through like quite a few iterations of
I'm
this,
sure.
like
I'm sure.
advanced. No, but it's good. I need to abstract this a little bit more. Right now, when I started refactoring this input manager, going back to the axis. So basically, what I would have to do is I would have to hold on. I need to go into Art Sandbox, Assets, Shared Scripts, Input Manager. Pull up the original Input Manager. This one's way cleaner. This is sort of when this thing actually will decide to show its pretty face on your screen.
Yeah, I'll let you know.
This is my old Input Manager, and
Okay, I see it
basically
now.
the way that I had it was I was going to have an Input Manager for each type of input. So I had keyboard, I had joystick, and I had touch. And in this one, you basically said, okay, well, you had an array, and you're like, here are all the buttons I want to watch for on the keyboard. And then it just went through update and looped through it. Then the problem was I was having trouble thinking of how to abstract this. Again, I was back at the, like I sort of see what you're saying. Like I could tell like an axis.
Just say they're all axes.
So then I guess whenever I would handle an axis, I would say, if this particular axis is negative, go left. Like somewhere I need to have a condition, but I need to say, like in this case, the way that this works is the input manager. All the input manager knows is that there is a button that is true or false, and
Yeah.
the input state just knows that there's a button that's true or false and how long it's been pressed for. The input manager is the sloppy code. This is the controller, right? This is the one that links everything and knows what everything is.
Yeah.
So it's the one that says, hey, I'm going to go through an axis and say you're either left or right, and then just tell the input manager in a clean way you're now left or right.
Right.
But
So I think that's kind of where you're getting caught up. It's not
Yeah.
going to have true or false. It's going to have an integer.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I see what you're saying. Oh, you know what? Okay, right. Okay, my brain just snapped back.
Yeah, so instead of saying, so for like a 2D game, instead of saying left or right, just take speed times input manager dot get axis horizontal. If it's -1, he'll move left, and if it's 1, he'll move right.
I had that at some point. I can't remember what. There was one weird scenario where that fucked me up. But
Yeah, the real key there is just to say, hey, my player's facing right, but he's moving left, so I obviously have to turn him around, right? So
Yeah,
graphically it lines up, but functionally it's actually quite generic. And the real kicker, the real kind of challenge is saying, is the button held down or is this the first time the button's been down, right? And I mean, you just put a little switch in there that basically the first time you pull it says, okay, now, it's not the first time this is held down or pushed down, now it's being held down. But that's the part that always kind of catches you up.
yeah, I think that brings. I think that's what was catching me up. The problem was that I needed to start tracking. I needed to really start tracking how long a particular value was held down for. So I went back to the button approach because, so long-term thinking, it's like if I want to build a fighter game, I need to know very granularly how long buttons are pressed for. And if I just had the horizontal axis as a value, and it switched, I would have to know the last one, and then it was so much more state. So I basically threw in the towel and was like, you know what, the input manager will just hard code and know what button it is.
Yeah.
But the input state, whenever I pass it this generic button value, it'll know, oh, it's been pressed. Just go through and I feel like I'm getting messages, which usually is a sign that I'm too loud and I'm getting yelled at. No, okay, I'm not getting yelled at. So that's where I was getting messed up. So I had to abstract it into individual button presses.
Yeah.
Because right, so like when you do like something like way more complicated, like a fighting game, you have to know independently, like maybe the down and the right are pressed, but like how long have they been pressed? When were they pressed before the other one? And switching between the axis stuff, just it works fine when you're moving forward and backwards, but not for that other stuff.
Basically what I would do is I would have a flag. So the moment an input treated as an axis diverts from 0, right?
Right.
So the moment it becomes either -1 or +1, I set the flag first down, right? And the moment someone says, hey, what's the value of that axis? Oh, it's down. That's when I flip first down to false again, right? Because, okay, they've checked it. They've got the first time it was down. It's no longer the first time it's down anymore. But also, just keep track of how long the input has had that value, right? So basically, if the input has a value of 1, how long has it had a value of 1? As you let go and it starts going back to 0, obviously the time it's had that value is going to be minuscule, not held anymore. And then to -1, how long has it been at that value, right? And that will give you, so basically, how long, you basically need the value of the axis, right? Whether or not it's been checked before, meaning that this is the first time it's down or not the first time it's down, and then how long has it had its current value.
See, but then think of it this way. If you're tracking all that and the changes, if you're using an analog stick, you're still technically going forward, but it would be resetting itself every time the value changes. Because I'd have to track the difference between 0 and 1 or 0 and -1. Like, let's just say we like do absolute value of it.
Yeah.
You would still have to know what is the off value and the on value. And I guess I could track that kind of stuff, but then where all the conditional stuff is going to wind up going in is my input manager that tracks the time is going to be incredibly complicated, right? Because
So
it needs to know.
when will you ever need to know how long a joystick is half pressed? I mean,
Well,
I get a
like,
button. How long have you held the button, right? But